Hi everyone. I recently had the pleasure of being interviewed by my friend, Ryan-Faulkner-Hogg, on his eponymous YouTube channel. The link to that is in the description down below. And in it we have a dialectic all about the guru scene, the self-development scene, which dominates large portions of the internet and indeed attracts the libido, or indeed the entirety sometimes, of, in particular, young men's conscious libido. And we talk about that in the context of what that might mean psychodynamically, what draws somebody to a guru figure. Of course, as Steve jokingly calls it, his first law, Steve's first law, by his libido shall ye know him. So we use that principle to dig in underneath to see what would draw somebody to these larger-than-life characters that fundamentally tell somebody how they should or should not behave. If you think about the reframe around the anima and the animus, which Steve and Pauline have gleaned from their clinical work as being the relating function, then you can immediately start to think about how exposure to a guru or a character like that, a manner personality you could say, could affect somebody's relating function and precisely what psychodynamic purpose it would hold for that individual. So this is being posted on Ryan's channel. It's already been up for a little while, as well as the first two talks that we had, as well as other content on his channel as well, which I would highly encourage you guys to check out. But we thought that it would be a good idea to share this video on the Jung To Live By channel as well, because we believe that there's some useful material for you guys to see. And hopefully it gives Ryan a little bump as well. So I encourage you guys to go over there and support him too. So without any further ado, here's the interview that I recently did with Ryan.
G'day James, how are you?
I'm very well, my friend. How are you?
Very good. So this is the third time we've come down for an official sort of conversation. And we were thinking that perhaps we could have a discussion about self-help. Now it's a very open concept to sort of start from, and I imagine you'll take it some interesting places. From the top, I was thinking that a major problem with the self-help industry at large is the fact that it's market-driven rather than peer-reviewed, right? So which is to say that at least when you go to a psychologist who is presumably going to help you, you can confidently say that this person is either qualified or not. And we were just saying that could even be extrapolated to a personal trainer. You know, you can say someone is either qualified or not. However, when someone bleeds through the algorithm, you know, or the book publishing lottery, they are there because of different forces, and it's not necessarily qualification. You know, they're sort of popularity based, definitely survivorship bias driven, and therefore a little bit less accountable. So as a start, like that immediately skews the tangible benefits that someone might get from, say, an internet guru, you know, the internet self-help guru.
Well, you say about qualifications, first of all. Qualifications don't necessarily, on their own, mean anything by default. I'm thinking of, I was watching with one of my friends last night, actually, a therapist on YouTube. I'll leave the person anonymous. No one associated with any of our spheres. It was like I say, associated with my friend's real life.
Yeah.
And she identifies herself as, hello, I'm XYZ, I'm a senior therapist. It's like, oh, okay, there must be something important about you. And she's talking about what to do when you overthink, how we always overthink. And we always overthink down negative pathways and negative thoughts and never about good things. And what I want you to do as a therapeutic exercise, this is the apex of her clinical work, is to go, every time a negative thought comes to mind. Just go, So you start thinking about pain, It's like, excuse me? What? So if you want to talk about qualifications strictly, it's like, I can understand why someone would be more attracted to an internet guru than to somebody like that.
You kind of just highlighted maybe the difference why an internet guru might be more popular than, say, the qualified peer-reviewed psychologist or person that's going to offer the self-help. Like the internet guru is far more seductive, right? They're far more attractive, and because they can build an image of all these other people that they've helped before them, which is the survivorship bias, it becomes very easy for you to come in and be like, well, I'm going to be a part of this as well.
People with qualifications, as I said, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. And there's another advantage, we'll say, to a young man or a young woman's, or someone who's just stuck in a rut's psyche. And that's how internet gurus can often present as manner personalities. This is a phrase that Jung talked about. Someone who is larger than life, and the way it would be described by, say, pop Jungians would be they are tapping into the archetypal layer of reality and they are channeling forces beyond them, and that gives them a mesmerizing capacity. That's not necessarily true whatsoever. There are multiple ways in which someone could be a manner personality. One of the ways you can determine, this is something that Pauline said on the Jung To Live By channel, determine if someone is a manner personality is, can they take a joke about themselves? You know, it's almost like the same marker of whether or not you can identify if someone's inflated or if yourself's inflated. Can you take a joke? So we are. If you look at the scene, we've got a young person or whatever, and or again could be an older person, and they've experienced a lot of nonsense over their lives, and they have a calling from what we would call the genomic self, or just that numinous feeling of I want to become better. They enter into a landscape, which is primarily these days on the internet, and it's like, well, who do I go to? Well, the institutions like you're talking about typically are largely ineffective most of the time, and I think that's a fair thing to say.
You're talking about some of the peer-reviewed institutions, some of the more classical, okay.
Yeah, and a lot of them lack spirit and personality, but that just comes with being in say, a government-owned or a government-funded institution. There's like a lack of vitality there. It's not inspiring. To go to a CBT therapist is not inspiring. I use them as the example because they're, say, the frontline guys you would find in the NHS. So you're suffering with whatever. It's like I either have a calling to be someone better, or you've got some kind of psychosocial maladaptation, or you've got some kind of psychobiological problem, or so, anxiety, depression that operates in like a waveform. The standard things that young people, or indeed older people, will report for themselves. So the institutions are kind of like, and there's an element of like judgmental parenthood about them oftentimes, is what people will report. But then you go to the internet guru scene, it's very, very, very seductive. Very, 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 very seductive.
Super seductive.
And it's like, well,
very
what are the areas in which people
rise to the top of that sort of field?
Oh yeah. So what areas are people going to be focusing on? Well, it's going to be different for men and for women largely, but you can track the instincts that are underneath the guru scene. A diet is an enormous one, and it varies. Carnivore, keto, whatever. There's something wrong with the modern diet, and we must fix it, which is a completely fair point. To be, to be fair to these people, we can track an instinct, a pretty obvious instinct underneath that, and then a lot of it will come down to sexual energy and relationships as well. It's like, well, that's going to be an instinct too, and then a lot of it is going to be moral behaviour, whether that be in a political or a philosophical environment. For example, this is something that Jordan Peterson primarily does. This is the primary influence he would have on an individual's, we'll say, anima, or so-called anima complex, or relating function complex that sits on top of the anima archetype. It shapes how someone relates. And it's like, well, Peterson tells you how to behave. It's like his 12 rules for life, and now he's got 12 more rules for life, and there could be more rules for life. It's like, so how I behave. Well, that's the father dynamic, the father instinct, the confirmation instinct, as well as the instinct to learn how to relate. So we can track them all in there, but the problem is they lack any, to be fair, well, they lack any kind of systematization, and a lot of the time, people, as you were pointing out quite rightly, mate, people rise up the ranks because they're charismatic, not because they have real-world experience. That's a problem.
That's also the consequence of the survivorship bias. How are you determining what's genuinely going to be worth your time and therefore good for you, and that which is going to be taken advantage of you? Because it might be easy to separate it from, say, the institutional stuff, but then when you're looking into self-help, and then also I was thinking, or just wanted to confirm actually, you said that a lot of them might be tapping in like an instinctual hook through the diet. Like, are you sort of saying that there are certain things that instinctually we're all trying to solve, and so like they might fish you in by coming at it through the diet? Like, for example, this diet completely changed my life. It went from 0 to 100, and then you're hooked in on the diet, and then he feeds you a bunch of other BS, which ultimately ends up in a course.
Oh yeah. I mean, the first thing you were talking about there, it's a good example of how you can, this is not an example of yourself, it's a hypothetical question, how you could track the negative anima, or so-called negative anima, negative relating function in somebody's typology. Because the frame, you can almost look at the frame in which that question's phrased. It's like, so we've got this peer-reviewed help, which might be unreliable, and we've got the internet gurus, who also might be unreliable. How do we determine what's right and what's not? Well, ultimately, if we return back to what the genome wants, rather than the frame of the question, which is like zoomed in many sort of layers down, then we don't have to answer that question at all. We can actually throw the question away and zoom out and say, we don't need any of it. Technically, there's the underlying principle that's driving underneath it. If we remove the trapping frame of, I need guidance to move from where I am now to where someone who I should be. That's the call of the genomic self. That's that numinous feeling to drive us forward. And it's like, do we need it from any of these people? Or is the answer actually coming from within? Because if you track a lot of what, I would say exclusively all of what the internet gurus are doing, this is where my own introverted thinking could potentially trap me. It's like, in particular, the diet one, the diet scene is one that, because of my biological training, sits well in my heart. It's like, maybe there is a problem with the modern diet. It's like, probably. if we look at the evidence properly, the answer to that is definitely yes. But in terms of practical bandwidth for 99% of people, especially if you're young, no. And that's absolutely fair to say. You're going to be okay. You're going to be fine. Will you be operating at optimal vitality? Probably not, but you're going to be absolutely fine. But in general, the different areas where these people are looking at, so especially in terms of relationships and psychosocial functioning, like for example with young men, it's generally how to gain status, how to work harder, how to talk to women. Those abilities are within yourself. They're innate, they're ancestral. And for a guru to come and call, you're right, it's like there's like a hook. The instinctual hook will get you to come in, but really the answer should be, my interest in this is coming from myself. And also, paradoxically, the answer to this is going to be coming from myself as well. That's the journey work of the personal myth. That stuff, by the way, on the negative anima, trapping the relating function, to sort of zoom in on a question and be like, so it must be one or two of these answers. It's like, that's in the personal myth guide, and it's an important thing to work out when moving through your own personal myth. Because it's it will send you down all kinds of very, very strange rabbit holes, and you can pull yourself out of it by saying, it's I don't have to engage with that frame whatsoever. Very useful therapeutically as well. If that helped give some kind of orientation of what's going on. Thought that was an interesting point to make.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And you do mention the personal myth guide at the end there, which is something we're going to dive into as well. But I first do want to sort of lay a decent groundwork over the efficacy of the internet guru, the abusive nature of some of them as well. Abusive nature just because it sort of takes advantage. But ultimately, the core of what your message is, and this is true anytime I speak with you, and also true throughout, it's like a through line throughout the Jung To Live By content as well, is that it all is an intrinsic journey along the lines of discovering your own personal myth, and at the very core of it, being in touch with your instincts. And that like kind of leads me to think that, is the guru even necessary? You know, even if it's a good guru, even if it's like a good mentor, you know, say your relationship with Steve, you know, or say Gordon Ramsay and his relationship with his initial boss, this Marco Pierre White guy, I think we're getting the name wrong, but it's along those lines, who he now has a totally failed relationship with. Is this guru necessary? Is this idea, because it's a very popular idea on, say, finance Twitter or business Twitter, but everyone's looking for this mentor. Everyone's being told this idea that the key to your success is to find a good mentor. And then it, you know, on the spectrum, then you have at one end the snake oil salesman who will just straight up sell you mentorship, which, by the way, I have an anecdote about as well. All the way to, like, you know, legitimate. You're a high performer. A guy who's already made it identifies you as a high performer, takes you under his wing, and tries to, you know, lead you down whatever path he went down. So, is the mentor, is the guru, is this actually something that is necessary? Is it good? Or at the end of the day, is it just our relating function trying to latch onto people that have experienced the success that we envision for ourselves? You know?
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot there, but you go.
This is a great example of dialectical syncretism. It's the fourth pillar of psychosystems analysis. The School of Depth Psychology Stephen Pauline created. Dialectical syncretism, as an alchemical philosophy, if you like, is taking two different dialectical, so it's like a conversation, and syncretism, meaning, like, you know, bringing things together in sync. So as an example of that, it's like you're coming from this field of money, Twitter, and finance and whatever, where you've got a definition of mentor, which presumably is like someone who can teach me things no one else can, or a very few amount of people can. Whereas in a depth psychological sense, a mentor would be far more, well, first of all, on the surface would be, say, professional development, but it does then go down into that personal development side. So, for example, it's an Eastern phrase that Steve told me a long time ago. He said, what they say over in the East is a mentor for a day is a father for life. Very different, because if you're looking for a business-based mentor, it's like presumably you don't want them to father you. But, and when you mentioned the relating function, that's the area in which to take a look at it. Because if you look at Gordon Ramsay and his mentor, the two act very, very similar. He was trained to relate within, presumably, I don't know if Gordon Ramsay's like Gordon Ramsay all the time. I hope he is. That would be hilarious. But he within
I get
that
the idea he's not, though, but
which is a real shame.
Yeah.
But within the psychosocial niche of the kitchen and being on camera, he relates in the same way as his mentor does. But that doesn't have to be the way that these things manifest. But we do see the way, or the dynamic that's at play when a mentor steps more into that sort of father role, rather than, say, being a personalized textbook who can just relay off information. function. That would be to try and bring the two frames together, a very, very loose surface level example of dialectical syncretism. To try and take your frame and my frame and see what we can blend together, what the common language is, so we can move forward. That's necessary therapeutically when you've got a Freudian and a Jungian and an Adlerian and a CBT and a medic and everything all trying to communicate together. You go up to a Freudian and you say, oh, the anima. They go, what are you talking about? And the Freudian then goes, the id. And the Jungians go, oh, the id's not real. Yeah. That kind of thing. But so looking at the relating function then in this sense, it's like the Peterson example I mentioned a couple minutes ago. What's the role of a father? What's the role of a mother? What are those fundamental instincts, or Jung would have called at that level of mother and father, archetypes, but we just call them instincts that need to be fulfilled? Well, psychosocial relating is absolutely essential. So if you're looking for a guru to tell you how to behave, that's the level of psychodynamic that we're operating at. Because we might approach them with ego fiction, say somebody who's talking about nofap, for example. Very, very, very common, a massive meme. It's like, nofap helps me become a real man. Nofap helps me with X, Y, Z. There's all this science behind nofap, the science of porn. I don't want to straw man it at all. But there's these reasons. But really what's happening is you're listening to someone telling you how to behave, fundamentally with nofap right at the level of instinct. Right down there. If you take something like money Twitter, I've been on money Twitter I haven't been on in a while, mate, because it makes me feel physically sick. I really can't take it, but I know the general themes and the way everyone relates is basically the same. And a lot of it then, the reason why I've spoken to quite a few people actually, people around my own age, entrepreneur types, who experience money Twitter, and we all know the same gurus from there and whatever, and they all report the same feeling of being hurt on the inside when they're exposed to these ideas. It's like their manhood has been hit by being exposed to these people. And it's like, oh, I'm not earning 6 figures a day. Oh, I'm not drinking my black coffee at 4 a.m. Oh, why haven't I got a mentor? That kind of thing.
Why isn't my internet business turning over 30,000 a month? Like
exactly.
Everyone else's.
Exactly. And it's like, you can understand why that would be appealing, in particular to a young man. If we go right back to instinct, you've got status in there. But then you've also got the way a man should behave. Because then you also get things like escape the 9 to 5. Anyone who doesn't escape the 9 to 5 is an idiot. They're brainwashed. Anyone who doesn't have $10,000 in their bank account is an idiot and brainwashed. Anyone who can't afford to tip the waiter is an idiot and brainwashed. A man is like this. So that's the dynamic that we're seeing. There is an element of transference there, regardless of whether or not it's a more, say, that Eastern style metaphor where someone's coming in for personal development to actually help you fix your relating function overtly, versus someone you think you're just learning things from to gain status over. It's not. There is an element of transference there always. You're allowing that person into your psyche to influence you. Always. And you might dream about that person. That person might be a significant checkpoint in your personal myth story when you go through it again. And it's like, okay, that's the rough dynamic that we're seeing. So I mean, how to discriminate, or whether or not gurus are useful as such, it's like, well, as a general question, yes, they could be. And chances are, if you're going towards a guru, you don't have the knowledge by default, because you're going to a guru, to discriminate what's right and what's wrong. I would reframe the question around, if it was myself approaching it, or therapeutic with a patient, and go, what's driving somebody towards the guru? Then it's powerful, because then, say, if you've got a problem with your gut, like going back to the diet example, you can then safely, with psychological hygiene, go to that guy who maybe is outside the establishment, who has experience with natural medicine or the microbiome or whatever, and be like, okay, this might help. And it might help. Versus someone who goes, all of my problems are the source of my gut, and this particular, probably elderly man on the internet, or middle-aged man on the internet, is going to tell me how to fix if I buy all his products, and isn't this great, and I want to be exactly like him. And he's also got all these other hobbies and bits and pieces, and the way he talks, and I'm starting to pick those up as well. There will be an element of that. Always.
You start getting his interests as well, identifying them as your own.
Oh, yeah.
But it sounds like, it might be true, because it's not like it's all negative experiences interacting with these gurus or trying to take on the ideas of these gurus. Like, I think the fact that they've survived in the public consciousness with such force does suggest that there is actually some good being withdrawn from them. It could be the case that it's a sort of net detriment, like they're taking more from you than you're getting from them. But maybe it is the case that it's sort of just like a stage, a step that one must go through. They almost have to see these different gurus, project themselves onto these different gurus, to then be let down by them, and to then realize that after I implemented whatever their process was, it actually didn't change me for the better at all. I'm in fact exactly the same as I was before. Like, maybe you have to go through that process several times to then get to the point where you're like, oh, I always come back to one thing, and that's my instinctual self. And I always have the same problem, and that's, my love for sweets, or my proclivity to have 5 pints instead of 2. Like, and you kind of, you come back, I think, to whatever this sort of baseline is. And it might be true that it's the same problems again and again that are getting you wrong. And, I read online this quote about self-help, and I think it's quite relevant here. He said, self-help is just another form of avoidance or procrastination. In doing your 6 a.m. wake-ups, your cold showers, your caffeine detox, you avoid making the actual change that is needed most. In most cases, this actual change is much harder than a superficial behavior change as well. And it's true that I think a lot of the gurus they're giving you these superficial behavior changes, very tangibly. Don't masturbate, don't come for like 6 months, and you'll be a super strong, effective human. Like this sort of nonsense. But I like the way he says it a lot there. It's like, in most cases, this actual change is much harder than whatever the superficial behavior change is that this guru is sort of telling you to do. And in the worst cases, in the most egregious cases, charging you money for as well.
Oh, dude, I love what you've just said there. Absolutely love it. Because we're not saying, or at least myself, I'm not saying, and I know Stephen probably aren't either, there should never be any gurus, and what everyone should do is just return to their personal myth. That would be ideal. I'm not going to lie. That would be absolutely ideal. But that's not a realistic scenario. Depending on what the stage somebody's at in their personal myth journey, or they're tracking their own anima development or whatever, they'll be more receptive to messages on the outside than others. Now, some of that's a measure of reflexivity, but these things, like their favourite gurus, are defended because there's a real powerful psychodynamic at play in the psyche to your favourite guru, or your suite of favourite gurus, all those ideas, that's operating at the level of complex. So someone is going to go through that journey. Someone's going to go through the hero's journey many times. If the hero's journey never ends, it constantly goes on and on and on and on and on. The marker is whether or not you can remove that transference. If you can remove that transference, you've completed that chapter of your personal myth. In that sort of, if we're making it more mythic and more narrative than necessarily it needs to be, it's like, so I got what I needed, and I actually learned that what I was getting was, it could have been arbitrary, it could have been anything that the person was telling me. I could have gone to a nofap guy, or a diet guy, or a workout guy, or a pickup artist guy. It happened to be that particular set of wounds I had at that time, and by wounds I mean unactualized potential, or psychosocial maladaptation, or whatever it happens to be. Could have been anyone, put them in. And I've actually learned that I have the power in my own hands. I've understood what was drawing me towards this person. I felt like I needed to be guided, and I felt like I needed somebody to help shape the way I relate. Yep. I've taken the power back for myself. That's the healthiest. And that's the way of forgiving of everybody who falls into these traps. Because they are technically traps, because you fall in, you'll tread water, and generally nothing good comes of any of this stuff. I've not met anybody, and I've spoken to quite a few people in these spheres, either viewers or friends or whatever. No one has reported sustainable, beneficial personality change from exposure to a guru. Nobody. That's weird. That's really weird. People have reported thinking that they did. That's very different. To be like, oh, I now live a more meaningful life. It's like, well, what do you mean? Are you relating better? Like, do you feel better in yourself? And it's like, well, no. Have you moved forward in life? Well, I've earned more money. It's like, do you feel happier? No. So it's like one dimensional, and we can track exactly which instincts were at play, and precisely one-to-one corollary between the guru, the way that they manifested psychosocially, and the relationship with your psyche, and the particular quote-unquote benefits that moved you forward. Gurus can be useful, but it's like it's like a little boy needing a father. And none of us want that. That is, to say that to someone would instinctually hurt them as well, and it would make them realise.
But honestly, I don't even think it will instinctually hurt a lot of people. It seems more people are more than happy to admit that, yeah, no, I am looking for that guidance. How else can you explain the truly unbelievable popularity of a man like Jordan Peterson, a man who I don't want to harp on a topic that we've spoken of at length, and frankly, everyone speaks of at length, but he is the ultimate father projection in the public consciousness of the West, right? Like people that actually listen to him. I mean, the fact that he's come back now, as popular as he was before, perhaps even more popular, it's like, it speaks to what was this giant gaping chasm that he didn't fill the first time around that he's somehow going to come and fill this time around. You know, like, I think one of the things that connected with me most when we first spoke was you said that moving on from the guru is where the benefit is made. It's where the development in yourself is made. If there is such a thing as like self-development from another person, it's going through the journey of the guru, coming out the other side and being able to set them aside and say, thank you, you've helped me. Now step aside. I'm going to continue on my way here. You know, and then I related further to a man, Nassim Taleb, who I totally projected onto, you know, wanted to emulate completely. And then it got to the point where it's like, you know, in fact, no, I've moved on from you. I've taken the best that I can from you, and I really appreciate it, but you're no longer going to influence me in any sort of way. But yeah. There's something I think hanging over the chat, and that's the notion that, I mean, yourself, James P. Dowling, have been this guru type for many people. And even furthermore, the people following Jung To Live By might also be projecting these same feelings onto the content that you're creating over there. You know, so how do you think about this? How do you rationalize it and deal with it?
Oh, yeah. Well, myself, before I met Stephen Pauline, I would certainly say I was in the guru camp, without a doubt. I had nowhere near the reach that, say, the normal gurus that people talk about would have, but that's not an excuse. It was myself attempting to cure the world of my own disease, basically, and you can track the things I was interested in and the people I spoke about and everything, and you could do a very good job. The content is still up. On, say, the Uber Boyo channel. And you can track, if you use, say, the personal myth guide to go through it, to track your own stuff, you can reverse engineer mine quite nicely and see what my wounds are. And I've actually been fairly open about that. When it comes to Jung To Live By, it's like, are we gurus? No. Reason why is... it depends on your definition of guru to some degree, but Stephen Pauline have their massively long clinical career. They have put in the hours, they've put in the years, and they've lived an authentically... Freud, Adler, Jung, if you like. We just call it Jung, because Jung To Live By. Life. And they're open about that on the channel as well. Now, someone can come to Stephen Pauline and be like, oh, you're full of shit. But it's like, we don't care, to be completely honest. It's one of the rules on our Discord server. It's like, we don't exist solely to be challenged. We are pluralistic in beliefs. We want open conversation. Critique if you think there is a worthwhile critique. But what you're seeing in those moments when someone will come and just be like, oh, they're full of shit, they're idiots. There are Reddit threads about myself, for example, saying horrible things. And it's like, this is transference. This is exactly what we're talking about. Transference can be positive or it can be negative in that strict sort of polar sense. Obviously, it's not really polar, really. It's a false dichotomy. But say people could have a very strong transference on, and this does happen all the time, a strong positive transference onto myself or a strong negative transference onto myself.
Yep.
Or Steve, or Pauline. So it's the same dynamic we're seeing that draws people to the gurus. And it's the same thing we see when people are drawn to one guru and then they hate another guru. If you remember to the Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, I think it's a good example of this, where suddenly the entire self-development scene overnight was split between people who are like, I'm atheist, who existed forever, you know, although they've existed since Richard Dawkins came on as potentially the OG internet guru. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not necessarily a historian of the internet, but he must be there in the early days on sort of the Sam Harris side.
Hitchens could well be, because his YouTube presence from even when he was still alive was huge, bigger than Dawkins. But that's actually a really fun sidebar. Is Hitchens the original internet guru? Interesting, but go on.
Yeah, well, it could be. So I would just say Hitchens and Dawkins. And of course, therefore, you get this whole legion of atheist young men who are like, of course, this is the way to be, to really live my life is to be an atheist. It's like, it's the same thing. It's how do I live my life? How do I relate? What's my modus operandi in the world? And then you got the Peterson side, who suddenly overnight everyone's an expert in Christianity and Nietzsche and everything else, who goes, nah, but it's not obvious that the Bible is wrong. And they're all at each other's throats.
And atheists have gone from there's no such thing as God to, well, there's definitely a higher being, but I don't think it's God. I mean,
yes, that shows the localization in the psyche of where these ideas are originating. It's coming from, with both of those sides, a father complex. Therefore it's very loose and malleable, especially in the context of transference. So an idea will swap and change, as you've seen. Like, I note it in myself too. I was the biggest diehard Richard Dawkins atheist. Then Jordan Peterson comes along. It's like, it's not obvious that the Bible is wrong. Overnight! It's like, so this was the core of my identity that was right in my self-concept. It's like, no, it was on your complex. That was controlling everything you were doing because you were a little boy. That's what we're seeing there.
Totally malleable, just to someone who's a little bit more charismatic than the last.
Exactly right, or happens to speak to your particular wounds or your particular wounds at that time than anybody else. But this is something that as we're recording, reminded of something Steve wrote on the Discord yesterday. He tries his very, very best, and very successfully, to be a transparent pane of glass to transmit the light through. And he understands that the light does not originate within himself. The light is ancestral, and it's passed down. The ego's job at the end of the day, so that which we call James, for example, or that which we call the viewer who's watching or listening to this, the ego's job is to make some level of executive action and control, preferably towards optimal psychosocial maladaptation. That's its job. Everything else isn't you. It's not yours. The source of your knowledge and wisdom and the things that you learn come from the outside world, come from experience, but you're not the source of it. That's very different. That's a buffer against a mana personality. So maybe useful for this conversation, we can actually fractionate guru down and say, because obviously we can say lots of people, could it be a teacher? So, well, it could be. The gurus I'm talking about then, which is the vast majority of them, would be mana personalities. Those inflated sense of selves who are... in the worst possible example you can think of would be like a Hitler type character, but the good mana personalities as they manifest, say, as internet gurus, is the same psychodynamic category, not say in terms of moral relevance. That's the thing to watch out for. So with Jung To Live By, it's kind of like you've got Stephen Pauline's 40-year-long clinical career. They've decided that they would like to do this kind of work to help people online, which is something which is incredibly rare for someone of their, say, status and their experience. And it's like, then they get all kinds of negative transference flown their way, and it's kind of like, stick to your current guru then. See how well that does it. But that's your story and your myth, and it's like, we're not going to interfere with that. And the people who are in the server and the people who've spoken to us and the students, everything else, is kind of like, no, this is actually working rapidly really well. So it's up to the individual how receptive and reflexive they are, and that will vary almost like a bell curve biologically across different people.
There's so many different avenues I'd like to take that, and I'll put them out there, and hopefully you can touch on all of them eventually, but maybe one at a time. But the one that stands out most is circling back to how we first defined the guru, the fact that it's the internet guru and then the establishment guru. But then there's also, within the internet side of things, people outside of the establishment who are still legit and then who are not legit. And it feels like, because depth psychology isn't necessarily recognized by the establishment, right? So it sits outside of the establishment, though it nonetheless has the beneficial quality that a peer-reviewed practice might have. So there's that, like, talking about that for a second. But then the theme, which really always is the theme of, I think, good Jungian content, but then also whenever I speak with you, is it's instincts. It's coming back to identifying what your complexes are and how can you tap into that instinct to get rid of that complex. The father complex is probably the most popular, especially when you're discussing among men. But then I wanted to ask, how do you deal with that criticism, James? Because, you said there's entire Reddit posts dedicated to shitting on you. I mean, that's how does one remain psychologically healthy and manage with that?
I typically just don't engage. I mean, we get we get a lot of nonsense, but first of all, we get a lot of engagement. say more than the average per, say, views or whatever else that we get. And that includes all, say, different funnels that we have, including into the Discord. But with that, in proportion, we get a lot of negative nonsense as well. And it's like, I choose typically not to engage. If I see something that's overtly negative against myself, immediately the first thing that will put me off is the tone. If the tone is very, very, I hate you, and I know more than you, I'm like, okay, like, what's driving this? Is it a legitimate critique? Because I can be critiqued a lot by especially, say, older people who've lived life more than myself, and that's perfectly legit. It's when it's having the hygiene to look at something that you see or somebody that you see and be like, okay, what's driving this? And most of the time, if you look at the tone as the general marker, it's negative transference, and I can understand why. And I think anyone can probably work out why. And it's the same with anyone who's speaking on the internet. And your complexes will fill in the gaps as to what my life will be like. And there's all kinds of stuff. So I typically don't engage. It's like, you're always going to get this. It's the same stuff that you can get therapeutically with a negative transference. All of a sudden, a patient can just turn around and flip. Or you're engaging in depth with someone who you know. It doesn't have to be within the consulting room. And all of a sudden, the relationship can flip. And all kinds of bad things can come out of that other person directed at yourself. And it's just, you need to have ego strength.
Sure.
Which is the most recent student seminar actually that we had, was on ego strength and the necessity of that, to have those strong boundaries in place. To be like, no, I'm moving forward. I've taken a look and detach. It's literally just a case of that. And it's not always been that easy. Sometimes negative feedback used to really upset me. But
like it would just dwell as an anxiety.
Yeah. It was quite a long time ago, but it's moving forward. It's like every single man comes across obstacles. Every single woman comes across obstacles, and they can be either in a fantasy Jungian sense of, say, slaying the dragon, or they can be literal obstacles that get in the way then trigger off complexes inside of yourself, which are the real enemies or the real landscape with which we should identify mythological characters. So I don't know if that's a helpful answer. That's the best I could give.
No, mate, it's really helpful, and it's I'm not surprised to hear it. Like dealing with it in a very emotionally mature way. Just being able to realize, well, it's nothing personal. This is something happening in their life, and they're now projecting something they really dislike, whether it's about themselves or something they're interested in, onto you. I think it's very true that no one thinks about you as near as much as you think about you. And so any second you've spent in a state of anxiety or a lower state of homeostasis just because someone insulted you is only detriment to you, and I think bringing that to the front of mind whenever there is criticism leveled against you, assuming it's not justified, because it also can be justified, but assuming it's not justified, that's a good way to get over it. But also we're not evolutionarily developed for this type of criticism, James. I mean, never until the last 40-50 years, you could be the exact same man you are. You could be ingesting the ideas at the rate you do with great people around you like Steve and Pauline. But 50, 60 years ago, you would have spoken to max 100, 1,000 people. And therefore, your criticism of 1% would have been significantly less. But now your ideas can potentially reach millions. And evolutionarily, we are not prepared. We are not. We haven't evolved to deal with criticism on that scale. Simply because we haven't evolved to communicate with people on that scale. If 1% of people are malintended and you reach 1 million people, man, that's a lot of negative feedback coming your way. I can only imagine how people like Tim Ferriss or Joe Rogan deal with it. I mean, Joe says he doesn't look at his comments, but Tim Ferriss wrote a great blog post once about the downsides of fame, because he's got an email newsletter that's in the ballpark of 10 million subscribers.
Jesus.
Yeah, so it's unreal. And say 1% of them? Holy fuck, man. That's 100,000 people who irrationally hate you. And then like a further 1% of that, say 1,000 people, they could be homicidal, mate. You know, is it too much of a stretch to say 0.1% of society is homicidal? I mean, maybe that's way too much of a stretch to say, but at least psychopathic. I don't know if that's too much.
Oh yeah. I'd say more than that would be psychopathic.
And imagine that, James. You know, so evolutionarily, we're not designed. Oh well, we're not designed at all. But evolutionarily, we haven't evolved to deal with criticism on that scale, you know. And I don't know if there's anything worth saying about it, but I just wanted to tag.
Well, you're absolutely right. If you say somebody, and this often happens with like an overnight sensation or an overnight star, if their growth rapidly exceeds what they are like adapting to, then that can be a serious problem. But the human beings are incredibly psychosocially adaptive and adaptable. So take Tim Ferriss's rise. I'm not overly familiar with it. I know his was kind of like a trickle, then it was a boom with like the 4-hour work week, I think, from memory. That would have been the key moment in which he would have had to adapt to that new level of fame and that new level of... Because, if we think about the past, we're all descended from king and queens, and people who are in charge of countries. And they would have had, to be completely fair, less criticism than, say, someone like Tim Ferriss would have. Would you have 100,000 people in the kingdom bashing on the door all at once? It's like, probably not. It's in general, some people have had that before. But I think we can take it. And what also helps is the fact that it's virtual as well. It's not seeing individual faces. It's comments, it's words.
Yeah.
And which makes it more easy to sort of cognitively detach. But what also helps is being, one, grounded in a timeline as much as you can be, based on the effort and the work that you put in. So that's the work of the personal myth. But also being in touch with those instincts, which helps alleviate those anxiety states or those depressive states or whatever. It's like, have you got a peer group and people backing you up? Have you got a partner? That kind of stuff. And then you feel stronger. Then you've got, like we call it IPSA, a cadre alongside you, like Alexander the Great's cadre. They're all going through the same thing, all understanding. And it's kind of like, oh, there's like someone who's throwing shells or bombing or whatever from like a boat just outside our aircraft carrier, and it's like they can try. The instincts feel calm. It's like threats, but fine. But I'll let you know when and if Jung To Live By hits 1 trillion followers on Instagram or whatever. Then I'll let you know. If I go a bit weird, then you could remind me of this.
Let's bring it a little bit back to gurus and self-help, if we can. I wrote this down, and I wasn't surprised to hear your position on it. Let's say, obviously the way you say it is fresh, but the position nonetheless. And I feel very similarly. And I sort of wrote this as an idea of, once you realize that the guru is not someone to attach onto, but rather extract from, that this could then be the continuation of it, right? So self-help addresses the needs of being productive, optimization, efficiency, success, and so on. But one must ask themselves the question as to where these motivations sit on the psychologically healthy human's list of priorities. Because instinctually we are all driven towards individuation, whether we consciously realize it or not. But therefore, with the psychopop and the self-help, we might naturally gravitate towards it to both better understand and shortcut as a way of meaning, which is to say, if you do get involved with Jungian content and the idea of individuation is then brought to the front of mind, you're like, okay, now I'm targeting it more. Whereas before, instinctually targeting it, it kind of accelerates the process a bit.
Yes.
Massa menos. But it's all the guru distraction. It's just fishes in the ocean. And this is the lovely Musashi Way, the warrior metaphor, because as you dive into life through the ocean to the seabed floor, like, that's the goal. That's the process of individuation. All the fishes around, all the gurus, all the distractions, that's exactly what they are. They're just stopping you from the actualization. They're taking you away from whatever your instinctual path might be.
You're attracted to them for a reason, but they will cluster, or they're associated to complexes, and the complexes will cluster around your personal myth through line, which is part of your personal myth, it's part of your story. But to get down to who you are at the deepest level behind your persona, we'll say, then who are you? And we were chatting a little bit about this before we started recording. So, well, that's a question which the ancient philosophers have asked for a long time, and the stories of mythology ask. It's like, well, what makes you? to answer that question, I won't, because I can't. First of all, I'm working on that myself, but it's certainly not your complexes. We can definitely all agree on that. It's certainly not the stuff that you've picked up and acquired over your life that's going to change and shape your psychosocial adaptation. It's not you. So the gurus will be distractions, but transference is instructive. That's such a useful thing Steve taught me recently. Transference is instructive. It shouldn't be there for a healthy, adapted person, but we can be like, it's here for a reason. For example, take I won't name any names, but like so say there's like if we were going to create our own optimal internet guru to then wheel out, like in a marketing sense, to then wheel out into the self-improvement sphere, what would it be? Would it be for young men? Would it be an old woman who starts talking about the absolute importance of drinking orange squash with bits in it? It's like, no. That, I think, is even enough of a grounding to be like, so it's about the person. It's not about what they're saying. Some of it's about what they're saying, but ultimately the hook is that particular person. And it's instructive. Whether or not you can reverse engineer why you're attracted to it is the marker of whether or not you will move forward. Otherwise, you'll be stuck in an endless cycle. And it's like, why do you feel like you need a dad? Maybe you do. Maybe you do. You know, it's like maybe you need somebody to come and guide you. But for most people, the healthiest thing to do would be to detach, and to instead of going towards a guru to teach them how to behave, it would be to wed their relating function, or to move towards wedding their relating function, or in Jungian terms, wedding the anima, which is the journey work of a lifetime, but it's being in sync with that part of you that relates both to yourself and to other people, and at all layers of your biology, your psychology, and the social layer of your life. So that's far better, because that makes you far more adaptable to fluctuations in your psychosocial environment, in work, in school, in relationships, in whatever, and then things change and shift. Far better than being told, here's the way you should behave, here's what a man is in a prescriptive top-down fashion. That is very, very important, in my opinion.
Let's talk about the personal myth guide. So this is a piece of, you said before, cornerstone. It's like the cornerstone of Jung To Live By. Is that what you said off air?
Yeah. I would describe. I have described it as our flagship.
Flagship, precisely. Okay, so it's this flagship book essentially, but perhaps you want to talk about it a little bit. But in the context of gurus, it's interesting to think about, well, why would one want to embark down the journey of understanding their personal myth? You know, because it does intersect quite, not insidiously at all. It's quite a natural intersection with the guru. I mean, if you look at the guru, the daddy of all gurus, Jordan Peterson, has his own self-authoring program, but nonetheless, this personal myth guide. So what is the personal myth guide, James?
Well, that guru question's interesting. It's why earlier I think the reframe towards man of personality would be better. Because otherwise there could be a conflation between guru and receiving any kind of guidance whatsoever. Because then you could call Freud a guru, and it's like probably not, or Plato a guru. What's that? This kind of really. And there are lots of these products around on the market in terms of the broad category of self-development. That's the category, for example, that it's on, I believe, on lulu.com. The print version is under self-improvement. That's the broadest possible thing. And there is the self-authoring program. There's been an interesting dialectic recently. I wasn't involved, but on the Discord about the self-authoring program, because it comes to people's minds after the personal myth guide was released. And a few people reported the same thing. Where they said they came to this independently. This is how they've been paying attention to the YouTube channel. One of the questions in the self-authoring program is like, ask yourself, what's the person who you want to be? Where do you want to go? What are your dreams? Very inductive, very When You Wish Upon a Star, very Disney, very pure and innocent. It's not a good question, and it's an awful question for self-development purposes. Especially in a clinical context, and even outside of that, because what part of your psyche is answering? It's the same thing, by the way. People can test this if they go take the Myers-Briggs test, and depending on their mood, they'll get a different result, because a different part of them is answering the test. So it's the same thing. It's what part of you is answering the self-authoring suite. What the personal myth guide contains is an absolute vaccination to that kind of stuff, to seeing whether or not it's you or a complex.
Right.
So it's the apex of Stephen Pauline's clinical work, built on the clinical work of Freud, Adler, and Jung. through their what I've personally described to their students as kind of a syncretic model between all of them, all those different schools, psychosystems analysis. And what it's doing basically is saying that, so there's a teleology built into each individual person, and we know this is the case because, you're formed from two gametes meeting, makes a zygote, so sperm and egg makes a zygote, single cell, and you have a pre-programmed lifespan development all the way through until death. At some point, preferably when you are old and it's time for aging and the natural winding down process. And you've got bits and pieces that need to emerge from your genome, or broadly your systems biology, over your lifespan. So, okay, what happens when something goes wrong? Then you develop what we call, or Stephen Pauling called, an individuation neurosis. It's like, so something has happened, usually in terms of your psychosocial adaptation, so that's usually in terms of parental complexes, but not broadly. We shouldn't just approach it like that for psychological hygiene reasons, that we call colloquially knocks you off of your personal myth through line. You should have emerged through healthily, and everything should have emerged normally, but you can't hold down a relationship, or you have anxiety, or you have a waveform of energy that brings you down into what colloquially might be called depression, so distinguish it from actual depression. Addiction, all these kind of things, an overwhelming obsession with internet gurus, whatever. There's something that's taking you away with what was meant to be you. That's what the Personal Myth Guide explains. It's enormous. I believe, off the top of my head, it's 458 pages.
Precisely,
and only some of it is the step-by-step personal myth process, and that's because everything has to be laid out first. Everything, especially complexes and the relating function. And there's loads more in and around that as well, but it's an understanding of the relating function, understanding the complex is the necessary precursory theory to going in as best as you possibly can. If you don't have that theory, you could probably do a fairly fine grounding job to be like, so what's me, what's not me, can I track my core memories? But to understand those is to understand how unconsciously your libido and your attention and your interest and everything else has been guided across your life. That'd be a broad thing.
Is it fair to say as well that it's almost a textbook introduction to depth psychology? Yeah. And I thought it was worthwhile bringing up because it's almost the antithesis to the guru worship. It doesn't have to be the antithesis, but it is an alternative path to the guru worship, because like we did say earlier, like it is almost natural on our path that we are going to latch on to several gurus throughout the journey, and perhaps understanding yourself and answering the big important questions by understanding your personal myth is going to do a much better job at calling out the BS in the gurus that you see along the way, and then attaching onto the really good ideas that you also see in the gurus along the way.
Yes. So take somebody who pick anyone. So anyone listening, pick your favorite guru or any kind of case study example, and in a snapshot of a moment. So a snapshot of space-time, you're observing the guru, you're learning from the guru, and your behaviour and your libido, your energy, everything is modified by this external imago and the words in which they're speaking, with the ego fiction of, because it is in most cases, especially because no one understands the psychodynamic underneath, truly in the unconscious, it would have to be an ego fiction to some degree of what this person is doing for me. So, well, if you put that in a timeline, that's very, very, very different to just sitting there experiencing what this is. And then someone goes, you shouldn't be learning from that guru, you should be learning from that guru. So we'll just take the Peterson, Sam Harris side of stuff. It's like, Sam Harris is right, no, Peterson's right. Put them all in a timeline. And what you can do, and I've seen people do this, I've done this in clinical work, you can just track your father transferences, if we just use clinical words for a second. You can actually track it. It's kind of like, so this is my relationship with daddy, basically, and then this was the purpose of dad. I understand theoretically what the purpose of dad is. That's in the Personal Myth Guide. This is what I didn't get. And so, hang on, wait a minute. As soon as I went off to college, or whatever, I noticed an interest in self-improvement. So the first one was away from dad. And my first transference was this person, then this person, then this person, all in a line. And I can track whilst that's going on, my interest or ability to relate to women is going down. And my interest in schoolwork is going down. My procrastination is going up. What, if you track it like that, like a scientist, like a forensic mind, you can go back and see what the etiology, in sort of medical language, or the original originating factor or psychodynamic was that caused this. That then brings consciousness. That's very different to just learning theory. to be like, well, this is the purpose of dad, or this is the purpose of guru. If you have consciousness brings with it affect or emotion. That's something you don't get from reading, say, a textbook or watching a YouTube video necessarily. You've got to put in the work. It's something Steve said as well. It's like, it's not a quick fix. We're not selling you a get rich quick scheme for the mind. It's you have to put in the work.
That's the stuff of the snake oil salesman. That's the stuff of the guru. Like,
exactly.
Promise of help. There is nowhere in the personal myth guide where I've said this is going to help you. Like, it doesn't actually, because you don't promise these sort of things. It just says this is a path. You know, decide to take it or don't.
If you put in the work honestly, genuine, and reflexively, then it will work. Unless, say, there's like severe mental impairment. So, for example, it's not going to fix schizophrenia.
Yeah,
right. You know what I mean? It's not going to fix Alzheimer's, but it's going to fix an individuation neurosis. It does. Yeah. And hopefully, if someone is, say, an avid viewer of Jung To Live By, they would have tracked my changes over time, which I hope I can broadly call development over time. Everything, how it shifted and changed. All of that, as I said in my first video I made on the Jung To Live By channel, was a result of the personal myth process. All of it, and the direct mentorship with Stephen.
It is actually quite fascinating, and I'm sure most fascinating for you as well. But you've had this development take place in public. And it's all and it's traced over time, which I can only imagine is like a very meta, bizarre, withdrawn way of looking at something.
Yeah, to go back and watch old videos of like the very early days on YouTube, which aren't around anymore. They're on private on the Jung To Live By channel. I tried to very recently. I was like, oh my god! What the weirdest thing as well is my voice is different. My voice is now. I was showing someone the other day, and they said that in the older days, including in the Ion videos or the Boyo videos, my voice is like, it's like I'm speaking from here, but now it's like I'm speaking from here, my chest. It's like I've grounded, I've relaxed, it's like my biology has caught up to me being 24 years old.
Yeah, and now you've got a nice, healthy ginger beard.
Oh yeah, coming through like Luke Kelly or my Irish ancestry.
James, something interesting you said was tracking your projection onto the man of personalities over time. Was it Dawkins, and then was it Harris, and then was it Peterson, and now who's the next one? I don't know, Joe Rogan or something. There's an interesting point to be made here that our generation and all the generations to come, they're going to have way more exposure to a variety of gurus than even our parents and before certainly had. Because before it might have just been the most popular actor of the day, or the most popular TV personality of the day, or maybe a very popular author of the day, right? And I'm curious how you think about that. Like, what does the guru proliferation say about the culture? The fact that so many more young men and women can now latch onto many more gurus than perhaps they could have before. Is it worth commenting on? Like, is it a natural phenomenon that's not?
It is.
Okay.
I think it's actually a really, really pertinent point. It's the proliferation of it. Well, it's like, what does it result from? Well, ultimately, gurus depend on money, so there has to be a market. It has to be like, if you really just bring it down, sort of like basic business sense. It's like, so why is there a market? So, well, there's a market because, well, look at the psychodynamic. People feel like they need to, we say primarily younger men, 18 or 16, something like that, to 35 maybe, feel like they need to be led and told what to do and how to live their lives. It's like, well, that's going to be parental. So the proliferation and the intensity and everything else is going to be a direct result of a generation of young people who have not received what they needed in an instinctual sense from their parents. So we've spoken a little bit about parenting and the next generation before on our chats. The best way to make sure gurus, in the sense that they exist right now on the internet, go away, and that's a moral choice if anyone wants that or not, but the way to do it would be give your son what he needs. Instinctually, give him what he needs. Because then he doesn't need it from anywhere else. There's no market.
But that's it's a very flippant thing to say. Because how on earth, I mean, parenting, I'm not a parent, but it strikes me as a pretty tough job. How do you just provide your son what he needs, your daughter what she needs, reliably, at a sufficient level? Because I guess there isn't a perfect parent, right? Complexes are going to develop in your children no matter how good you think you are. It's a knife's edge. Either side, you're going to be developing complexes. I mean, so speak a little bit more about that then. I mean, obviously, if you give your children what they need perfectly, then they're never going to develop the complexes that allow them, that create the need in them to project onto the guru or the man of personality. But that's just not the case, you know. So,
well, to just to clarify what I said, you're absolutely right. There's no such thing as a perfect parent, and even say the best intentioned parents in the world can produce a child who has some level of maladaptation, and it can even be the smallest internal wound that can lead to enormous damage in their adaptation to the world. It just depends on the right external stimulus for it. So you're right, and it's normal for say a young man to father transference to some degree. Because no one's perfect. But what I'd be referring to, and I think the audience would feel it, is when there's a significant guru or gurus over time that significantly impact the way somebody relates to themselves in the outside world, where it's like it's clearly not healthy, and this person should be moving on with their moving forward with what their genome wants from them. They need to be, if they're a young man, moving forward with a woman, preferably one woman, and climbing up some kind of career ladder, a certain sense of status, and they're moving forward with their own family, not dicking around, if you'll pardon the pun, with you need to not masturbate for the next 3 years. You know, that's the type of stuff I'd be referring to. And what I mean is, confirm your son, make him feel like a man, hand on the family torch, to say you are a X. You know, I'm happy that you are my son as you are, as my son. That's what young men need to hear. That's what they're getting by proxy in that kind of proxy confirmation from a lot of the gurus, because the baseline assumption unconsciously, which can be raised to consciousness very easily, is if you do X, so insert guru teaching here, you are a real man. So if you say to your son, or you make your son feel confirmed, he's immunized immediately against other men who are looking to confirm themselves by confirming you.
That elucidates kind of what I was thinking very well. Because it's like, what is it that attaches you? So it's the promise that you are a man because you have now done this thing. Yeah, exactly. And a healthy individual doesn't need confirmation from other people because he's already been confirmed by his own father. Yeah, precisely. Yes. Interesting. You know, there's something here now. It is kind of unrelated, but I really do want to ask you about it because, you know, I'm coming at this from as an outsider. You know, I certainly have an interest in the ideas, but I'm not, I'm not professionally versed. So it seems to me that a lot of the depth psychology, biopsychosocial dynamic framework to sort of view a person, it's entirely experiential, which is to say, there are certain, you know, like good and bad practices to, say, for instance, raise a child, or to be a responsible man, or to, you know, develop your own personal myths, so forth. Something that I find that I have a real that's really close to my heart is, what's the balance between nature versus nurture? Because in this very rambly way for me to sort of get my point out, but it does seem to me that nurture is given almost 95% weight in this equation, if you look at it through the biopsychosocial prism. Whereas if I look at my own brother, if I look at my dad and his brother, and my girlfriend and her brother, the experiences are so similar, yet the outcome couldn't be more different. And the one through line explanation is, well, perhaps we just have certain nature, and it is something which is quite unquantifiable, but it's also something that isn't well known. But I'm just curious to see, you know, how you think about that as a depth psychologist and as someone who spends a lot of time thinking about these ideas. You know, how do you think about nature versus nurture?
The best way to frame the question would be, the best way to frame my answer, apologies, would be, both are important and should be looked at. Most of the time you do look at nurture, because nurture is reversible. It's a different question around nature, whether or not that's reversible. It's like, you've got a particular gene, and it's like, well, in which case you lack the gene to do something else. Now, that's not being a biological determinist in any sense, but it's also not being an idiot about it. And being like, well, we do have a biological substrate that is inherited, which does form the substrate from which everything else emerges. So both are important. I can't give a percentage on either. But having said that, Steve and Pauline have observed that complexes appear to be, or can be, inherited biologically, rather than, say, just a familial complex that's passed down psychosocially. You can inherit it biologically. That's an enormous reframe, especially in the field of epigenetics. That's what I've been focusing on a lot recently, to be honest. It's interesting you asked that question. I gave a seminar recently to the first cadre of students about genetics and the genomic self, and the potential link between those, and dialectical syncretism between the central dogma of molecular biology. So that would be DNA to RNA to protein. That's Crick's work from the I think central dogma was 61 or 60. And the IPSA model. The structure of the psyche, complexes, the relating function, genomic self primarily. DNA, or the genome, is going to be the equivalent in a dialectical syncretism sense to the genomic self. And then it's like, okay, how do we then map the molecular biology and the map of the psyche in the IPSA sense together? It's like, how do we do that? Well, the relating function is very, very important. The relating function originates from the genome, but ultimately, as a complex, it is separate from the genome, and it filters the information from the genomic self. It needs to operate between protein and DNA in a cell, basically. It's operate between you and your DNA. It's going to operate epigenetically. It's going to operate at the level of gene expression. It's like, okay, so can you inherit things epigenetically? Yes. So therefore, can you inherit complexes, or the complexes that will influence your relating function epigenetically? Yes. We've observed how that can happen epigenetically outside of psychology in several studies, and the clinical experience of Steve and Pauline has backed that up. And in terms of molecular biology theory, hypothesis, and dialectical syncretism, what I've just said is a firm, solid model for moving forward towards a genetic basis for Jungian psychology. So the answer is yeah, but we don't entirely know. But usually, though, we do focus on nurture. Apologies if that's getting unnecessarily technical.
No, it's good, because it's starting to frame a link between biology and personality. Because a person's nature, if you think about it, it is their personality, and a person's biology is, what's their composition, from hair color to muscle density to whatever. But you're suggesting that there is a personality link to the biology, which obviously makes sense at a very intuitive high level, but at the microme, how does it then go to inform the otherworldly differences between me and my brother, who's only a year and a half younger than me, And we do have night and day personalities. Yet we had exactly the same experience. And I can't ask you to comment on the answer to something that you're not familiar with, but nonetheless, it is, it just does suggest there is just still so much unknown.
Well, I'd go to biology straight away with that, and I'd say obviously you've got genetic differences between you, but you've also got epigenetic differences between you. And then, of course, you've then got psychosocial differences between you. And we do not know, just off the cuff, as like a general rule, what the different biological variations between, say, yourself and your brother, how those variations will leave you open to effects from the psychosocial environment changing who you are in relative magnitude. That was a long sentence. It's like, so you could have a very small difference, but the same psychosocial force could then go and fractionate you down like that. Completely different. I have observed that before.
Yeah, and you're talking about like one interaction at school,
yes,
and that can be the trigger. Yeah.
Yes.
I actually really do think about it similarly, to be honest. There's so much weight given to the importance of parents, and rightly so. Obviously, it's the most important environmental aspect. But God, you cannot discount the influence of a friendship group and a school. And what suburb you live in relative to other people. Like, it's fucking huge. And it can be sort of just flippantly discounted because it's like, oh, but he lives in a great home. Why is he always acting up? Well, look at his friends and look at the experiences he might have had as a vulnerable 10, 11, 12-year-old, incredibly impressionable and just wants friends.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And so your story, therefore, would be different to your brothers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like you may have had the same or but you know, you may have had the same parents, but that's not the same thing as parental influence, because depending on your birth order or whatever, your parents will act differently between the two of you. And then there's what you had, or depending on who the older brother was, they wouldn't have the influence of the younger one until they were older, and that kind of stuff becomes a whole system. And so in many ways, Darwin would be putting 2 thumbs up at us right now, Darwin, because it's like there's so many ways in which the biology is prone to fractionating down in towards ever increasing levels of adaptability, and that's what the genome wants ultimately. Yeah, is that.
Yeah, James, we've been a little bit around the world, but I think there was a decent, at least a decent decompression on Google's on the gurus, the man of personality, and something we didn't really touch on at all was the internetization of Jung. But nonetheless, I like to close on a touch of little poetry here, because you mentioned before that life is just one good hero's journey after another, and whether you fully subscribe to that idea or not, it doesn't make the following passage any less sort of elegant. And Joseph Campbell said, what I think is a good life is one hero journey after another, over and over again. You are called to the realm of adventure. You are called to new horizons. Each time the same problem: do I dare? And then if you do dare, the dangers are there, and the help also in the fulfillment or the fiasco. There is always the possibility of a fiasco, but there is also the possibility of bliss.
I like it. I like it. I like it.
So in your own personal myth, in your own way that you're trying to relate with the world and people around you, don't get sucked into the guru. Jordan Peterson's back. Don't jump back on the Jordan Peterson train straight away. Step back a minute, observe, try and learn, and try and move on. Yeah,
it's such a shame to your own genome, your own ancestral legacy, to just hand it over to someone else to control. It's such a shame. Whatever. But it's going to help some people who are reflexive, or not necessarily. It's their own personal context. Some people will listen and be like, maybe I should be returned back to myself. Other people don't, and that's okay. It's not a one-on-one interaction. It's a video on the internet, and there's a level of engagement that someone will have with this. Yeah. And so it's their own journey, and I wish them well. I wish them well. But I know and I can say this defiantly with own personal experience, in the limited that I have, it's like it's so much better to be out of the sphere of following guru after guru after guru, pretending that you know who you are. And it's like, do I know who I am now? It's like, not to the extent I could, but I do know I'm not them. And I do know that's not the path set out for myself. And I hope, and the consciousness helps. It helps, and hopefully the tracked development, quote unquote, on the YouTube channel is testament to not only that, but the hard work Steve and Pauline have put in over the last 40 years plus. So,
and there's no cheap solutions, and there's definitely no easy answers. Ultimately, it's going to be your own journey that you're going to have to struggle through. And with that, James, until next time.
Take care. Absolute pleasure as always, my friend.
See you later, mate.
If you're looking to take your study of depth psychology and personal development to the next level, using Steve and Pauline's 40-year-long clinical experience as your personal guide, then make sure you check out Jung To Live By's flagship offering, Discover Your Personal Myth Ultimate Handbook. For anyone who has a calling deep in their very genome to become who they truly feel they should be, this guide is utterly indispensable. Pick up your copy today and make 2021 the year you truly begin to become yourself.